Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Maqbool with you at PTV World. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at two important stories. The first is a reference to the regional elections that have started taking place in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. And this is, of course, the first time this is happening in 10 years, and important also in terms of what has happened back in 2019, where the special status of the valley was revoked. And this is particularly important in terms of the way now that these elections are taking place and the dynamics involved, and what sort of powers exist and the impact and meaning of these elections. And we're going to try, of course, to understand what this means for the general public in the occupied valley and whether or not this impacts the people's right to self-determination and the struggle that has been going on for decades now. And so we're going to be also taking a look at what exactly will be the strongholds of power, particularly when many argue that a lot of this is going to be based out of Delhi itself, and this is not something that the local bodies or the local governments will have much control over. And so we've seen this previously as well, but this is important also in terms of how we've seen large numbers of Kashmiris come out, particularly in the parliamentary elections, to talk about and to stand up against the revocation of the special status of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. So whether or not they're actually going to do that this time around is also important, and also in terms of what exactly will be the verdict and whether or not this can potentially impact in any way the future of the people of the occupied valley. So that's what we're going to be taking a look at in the first segment of the show today. Our next one is going to be taking a look at what has been going on in the Middle East, particularly, of course, in light of the genocide that is continuing in Gaza, and then, of course, what has now happened in Lebanon with pagers being attacked. And this is, of course, something that has resulted in about 9 lives and also about 3,000 more others injured in Lebanon, including, of course, Hezbollah fighters. And this, of course, has now led to other developments and reports coming in terms of explosions of radio devices and walkie-talkies as well. So we're going to be taking a look in terms of what exactly is going on and how this is going to be prevented, while there are, of course, calls for de-escalation coming in from important countries such as the United States, which has given a stance in terms of not knowing who is responsible behind these attacks. But, of course, there have been many reports coming out in terms of Israel behind this attack, and what, of course, now is going to evolve and develop in light of what Hezbollah has said, that they are going to retaliate and make Israel pay for these attacks, is, of course, concerning not only for the Middle East but for the entire world as well, in terms of what exactly can possibly happen when this escalates. So we're going to be taking a look at this and the kind of warfare that we're dealing with today, and what measures need to be taken now for de-escalation, and whether or not there's any hope in that. That's going to be our focus in the second segment of the show today. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farrukh Pitafi and Raja Faisal. And for our first segment with regards to elections in the occupied valley, we've also been joined by Sardar Amjad Yousaf, who's the executive director, Kashmir Institute of International Relations, and Ambassador Johar Saleem is also President IRS. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being a part of the discussion today. And they're going to be, of course, sharing their views as soon as they're part of the show. And then, of course, we'll be moving on with insights from the team. Faisal, I'd like your take first in terms of what you understand, particularly when we talk about these elections, especially now that this is coming in after 2019 and the revocation of the special status. First, if you can also give us an understanding of, when we talk about these regional elections or state elections in India, what sort of importance and weight do these carry, and then especially, of course, in the aftermath of 2019?
Yes, and obviously when we talk about the elections in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, the reason why they hold these elections, these sham elections, the only reason behind it is that they want to show or portray to the world that Kashmir stands with India and wants to stay with India. That is why people are coming out for voting, and eventually there will be, turnouts. They would be showing around 62%, 63%, to portray as if people of Kashmir, they are okay with it, they are okay with the brute rule of India, and they are okay with the elections being held under almost a million rogue military of India that is stationed there. They are actually trying to make sure that this election is a sham election, and the results, they would be shown to the world and to the United Nations as well, so that nobody talks about the self-determination of the people of Kashmir. Reason being that people of Kashmir, they are okay with it. This is not the case. People are not coming out to vote, and there are many other factors that are actually contributing towards this. If we talk about the demographics, they have been changed since the abrogation of 370 and 35A. Then intruders from the other sides of India, they were actually brought in and they were portrayed as if they were the voters, the actual voters of Kashmir. They were not actual voters of Kashmir at all. There are several other aspects related to this election which we are seeing right now. If we talk about the regional parties, the conventional regional parties, there were two families. I mean, there's one of the Mufti family and the other one is the Umar Abdullah family. Umar Abdullah family, what they do is they always, of course, they are the stakeholders in terms of a very few people they have as their supporters who are beneficiaries of these two parties, these two families, because they get the jobs, they get all the dirty work which is being carried out in Jammu and Kashmir, Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. They are the two parties who are actually making people around the beneficiaries of their stake. And what they do is, even now, this time, they are fighting for the abrogation of 370 and 35A to be reversed, and Congress is with them. The Congress is on board with them. But when we talk about Modi himself knew that BJP won't be grabbing any sort of momentum out there, so they are relying entirely on the independents, and they are intentionally supporting the independents so that more of the independents, they can be shown as the winners of this election, and they can create a sort of a government out there that sustains all of the pressures in terms of reversal of abrogation of 370 and 35A. So overall, the picture is that nobody is bothered about this election. The only reason the center, Delhi, is trying to hold these elections just to portray that everything is hunky-dory, people are so happy, and people are having no troubles at all, and they don't want self-determination, a plebiscite. So this is what they're trying to prove.
Right. We've also been joined by Sardar Amjad Yousaf Khan, and he joined us online. Thank you very much, Sardar Sahab, for being part of us in this discussion. In terms of what we've been seeing, of course, in the Occupied Valley for so long, and now also in light of the revocation of the special status of 2019, I want your perspective, particularly in terms of what impact and meaning will these elections hold. We've, of course, heard from Faisal as well on this, but I want your perspective in terms of, especially when we talk about how this entire move, the unilateral decisions and actions taken in 2019 are themselves illegal, are in fact not something that are allowed under the UN Security Council resolutions. Then I want your take in terms of how does these elections then factor in all of that, and what sort of way forward is being presented by India, and whether or not there can be any action taken with regards to that. Sardar Sahab, can you hear me?
First, we have to understand.
Yes, go ahead.
Are you hearing?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, actually, first we have to understand that the assemblies in Muzaffarabad or in Srinagar or in Gilgit, they do not have any right to decide about the future fate of Jammu and Kashmir. Yeah. In 1953, when Sheikh Abdullah passed a resolution of accession in Srinagar Assembly, and there's a resolution of the UN Security Council of 1956 that the constituent assemblies in Muzaffarabad and Srinagar or any other place within J&K, they do not have any right to decide about the future fate of Kashmir. That can only be decided by a plebiscite under United Nations. Now, after 2008 elections, I think the 2008 was the first election when the parties contesting elections in Kashmir said during their campaign that these elections have nothing
I'll request you to hold your thought. We'll actually come back very quickly. We have to take a short break, and I'll come back and we'll continue this discussion. welcome back to the debate. We're talking about the elections that are continuing in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and of course the impact or the meaning that these hold and whether or not they're going to have any significant change within the valley. And Sardar Amjad Yousaf Saab was sharing his views earlier, and I'd request him to please continue. Sardar Saab, can you please also tell us what else is impactful, particularly in terms of when we take a look at the nuances of this entire situation? What meaning will these elections hold, and how do we see it impacting the future?
So I was just explaining that after 2008, that was the first election when the parties contesting elections, National Conference, PDP, and other parties, Jammu and Kashmir parties, not the Indian mainstream parties, they changed their stance and said that these elections are not for the Kashmir issue, these are for the local authority, and there have been 10 elections. I don't think there's any importance of these elections, because for the Kashmiris, we never fought for any special status. 370 is not an issue for Kashmiris. This may be issues, and a special status is an issue for those political parties or those thoughts in Kashmir who believe in accession to India. But the majority of the Kashmiris have rejected India. And I don't think I am in Geneva right now in the Human Rights Council session. I don't think there is any importance of these elections or anybody is taking these elections as a major breakthrough. Because if you see the Indian Parliament election, there were three major people contesting the elections. Engineer Rashid, who was in Tihar jail, Umar Abdullah, who is the president of the National Conference and former chief minister, and BJP supported Mr. Sajad Lone. Engineer Rashid, who was in Tihar jail, won election by more than 200,000 votes from Umar Abdullah, and Umar Abdullah took about 250,000 votes more than the person who was supported by BJP. The thing is that people even then voted for resistance, voted for a person who was in jail. The thing is that Kashmiris never accept any such move in J&K. And I tell you, there's a small community in Jammu, you can call them, BJP or anything. Majority of the Kashmiris, they have two choices. If anybody has first choice as Pakistan, his second choice is an independent Kashmir. Or any person who has first choice as independent Kashmir, his second choice is Pakistan. Majority of Kashmiris in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir do not have Indian choice. In these elections, I don't think there's any impact of these elections. This is a routine, and people will vote in these elections. People will vote and not vote for any accession to India, or there is no question that it has to decide about the future fate of Jammu and Kashmir. It's a disputed territory, and overwhelming majority of the Kashmiris believe that the decision of the state of Jammu and Kashmir is only through a vote, a plebiscite, a referendum under United Nations in whole of state of Jammu and Kashmir on both sides of line of control. Secondly, about the bilateral agreement. The Shimla agreement, if India unilaterally did something, we are not a part of any agreement. Kashmiris are not signatory of Shimla agreement. And everybody should understand that the two countries, India and Pakistan, they are the two states. According to the UN Security Council resolutions, the actual party is the people of Jammu and Kashmir who have to decide, who will decide with their votes. So when we are not signatory to any agreement, we only have one thing, that is the UN Security Council resolution, that Kashmiris will be given a right of vote to decide about their future, whole of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. And when that time will come, if India has India has majority on the other side, why they are afraid?
Right, absolutely. And I understand your perspective, Sardar Saab, and it's important, especially, of course, in light of the UN Security Council resolutions, as you've mentioned. But what's also important, of course, is the fact that despite the presence of these UN Security Council resolutions, we haven't really seen any change in the occupied valley. We have seen that these unilateral actions and steps have been taken, and the people of Kashmir continue to suffer, despite the fact that there seems to be some sort of legal avenue, however redundant done. And so I want your take, Johar Saab, in terms of what exactly are we looking at when we talk about change and when we talk about the protection or the fact that there are some legal grounds on which the special status of the occupied valley remains, because it has been, of course, 5 long years since this revocation took place. And now, of course, with these elections, I understand this facade of normalcy that is being put forward. But at the same time, these are steps and actions that are happening on ground, despite the existence of what we say is there in terms of international norms and traditions, in terms of UN Security Council resolutions. So when we take a look at realities and what is really happening, then how is it that these elections are taking place? How is it that this facade of normalcy is being portrayed? How is it that these discussions about political parties and value of people's voices and voters are being talked about, when in fact what is happening is that this is an occupied valley, there is a special status of this particular region, but that doesn't seem to be factored in any of the conversations.
This is not the first time, and perhaps it's not going to be the last time that the Indians are going to portray the state elections in the occupied Jammu and Kashmir as some sort of an accession or sort of, an endorsement of the legal accession that they claim. The last elections in this, of the state assembly, so to speak, were held in 2014. And after that, a government was formed by a coalition of BJP and PDP. And we know what happened to that. Eventually, BJP withdrew, the government fell, the PDP leaders were subsequently jailed, and in 2019, where they abrogated the Article 370, which was supposedly the basis of what they claim an accession. The very basis of the accession that they claim was dismantled themselves. And it's why, and after that, what happened? Since 5th August 2019, we know that a reign of terror had been unleashed in the occupied Jammu and Kashmir. We know that the thousands upon thousands of people were jailed. We know the curfews that were imposed. We know the internet had been closed. The telephone lines, literally it picked the whole Jammu and Kashmir under Indian occupation became a big, beautiful jail, unfortunately. So now that, and now it's not that the Indians government is just holding this election out of the free will. It's this Indian Supreme Court which mandated that. They also mandated some other things. Unfortunately, the Indian Supreme Court did not nullify the illegal actions of 5th August 2019. But whatever they're doing, this does not really change the status of occupied Jammu and Kashmir, disputed territory, whose future is to be determined by a plebiscite as mandated by the United Nations Security Resolutions of 1948 and subsequent, to which both India and Pakistan had agreed, and there were numerous occasions on which India had promised and committed to hold that plebiscite or referendum. So this is, in the past as well, they're saying that, like a few months back, when the Indian general elections were held, they were held in occupied Jammu and Kashmir as well, and they claimed that the voting was 58.46%. They're even claiming now that for the first round of these state elections, that the voting was to the tune of 58.2%. And they say that in the last 35 years, it was the highest percentage of voting. What is happening on the ground is that the Kashmiris have tried different things. They boycotted the elections in the past. That didn't help them. Now, what they feel is they understand the distinction between these so-called elections and the plebiscite, which is the long-standing demand. And it's very interesting because some of Kashmiris were interviewed by different and what the youngsters said was that, look, we will take part in these elections, perhaps. Why? Because first of all, we want the jobs, and we believe that, because, the unemployment in occupied Jammu and Kashmir is hovering around 18 point some percent. that is double the unemployment ratio, which is otherwise prevalent in India. So the youth, they are facing this problem. So it is only for the local issues that they think, okay, because they have seen the repercussions of boycotting such elections, because boycotting such elections gives Indian government and sort of, their authorities and those who want to deny the Kashmiris their rights, not just the right of self-determination, but all their other rights as well. That gives them a bigger leeway. So now they've decided that they're not going to leave a vacuum for the Indian authorities, for the BJP regime. And that is why they have contested this election, or they are participating in this election as a protest vote. And Gina Rashid's victory, as it has been very elaborately mentioned, very eloquently mentioned, while he was in jail, was a testament to that. The fact that BJP did not even contest in the valley during the general elections a few months ago, because they knew that they didn't stand a chance there. The fact that some very big leaders there, were defeated, it's a clear indication that this was a protest vote. This vote is basically the Kashmiris are showing their resentment. They're showing that, okay, we are not going to give you a free a free way. We are not going to, leave the field empty for you. We are going to be here. We are going to fight for our rights and every avenue possible. And these so-called elections also provide them an avenue to fight. And they are going to utilize that as well. We know that this election is going to take place in 3 stages. The first stage is the phase is done today, and the next phase is on the 25th, and then on the 1st, and the results will be then coming on the 8th. But I don't really see a huge difference. I think the voting percentage probably would stay, close to what it has, because 58% in the national elections, 58% in the first phase of voting here as well. But the significance of it, the symbolism of it, should not be lost to anyone. This is a vote for the resistance. This is a vote for defiance. This is a vote for their rights. But this is no way.
That's a very interesting thought, Johar Saab, because I want to explore that a bit further, especially in terms of what you're calling a defiance vote or a protest vote, because we, of course, need to understand that in the context of these elections and what is going on in the occupied valley as well. And Farrukh, I'd like your take on that, particularly when we talk about the fact that people are participating or are doing that as a protest, as a movement of defiance. I want to understand whether or not it actually achieves that purpose when there are people who are actually participating in these elections in the occupied valley, where the special status has been revoked and where the struggle has been continuing for decades. So do you think that from their perspective, or from the perspective of a nation or people who have been occupied, will that be a right move, and will that actually be registered as a protest in a country like India? And secondly, with reference to what we've been seeing in terms of what India would like to portray forward, is that actually enhancing their own stance or otherwise? Because at the end of the day, these elections are taking place and that people are taking part in them.
Right. And the second question is more interesting, but I will, focus on the first one as well. I think at worst, that policy of protest vote implies that you are able to defeat the so-called establishment, parties, National Conference and PDP. So if you manage to do that, you have already accomplished some kind of protest, right? And you have thwarted the designs. And of course, there is another element that is very important, and that is the case of Jammu, where because of delimitation, they have changed and increased the number of constituencies. And then they have brought in the 1947 refugees from Pakistan, and they are now also voting in the elections. So with that kind of a change, of course, if you are, local, and by the way, there's one very important thing. Whenever we talk about Kashmir, this nuance has to be understood, that when it comes to Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, if we are saying that those parts are parts of Pakistan, then you own everything. You own Jammu's Hindus, you own Ladakh's Buddhists, you own also the Muslims of Kargil, Shias of Kargil. So with all that, and Pandits of Kashmir as well. So with all that, you have to appreciate that everybody on ground is facing something, and that is an external pressure, an invasion of sorts by the Indian state itself. And by the way, if somebody thinks that these elections are indicating that it is business as normal, they couldn't be more wrong. There are two very interesting aspects, right? One, when it comes to the current state of affairs, Kashmir is not even a state. While they are calling it Vidhan Sabha or state elections, but they are declared as a union territory. And interestingly, Sana, last time Vidhan Sabha elections took place in Kashmir was 10 years ago. The question is, in 1989, there was a Vidhan Sabha election, and at that time, we know that because of the attempt by the Indian state to install Farrukh Abdullah, because of that the insurgency started, and it has been getting stronger and stronger. But despite that, the local elections, the state elections have been taking place periodically after 5 years. Why is it that 10 years have passed and there haven't been an election? Because of one thing. What happened 10 years ago? Modi got elected. After that, whatever Modi's government does is behave like a virus. They want to enter a system, and then they want to dominate. This first actually formed an alliance with PDP and BJP itself, and they wanted to wait till the time they can actually insert themselves into the system, and eventually they tried to take over the state and form a BJP government. That failed, and after that the assembly went, and then we know the state also went. With that kind of state of affairs, everybody who can see that it is not business as normal. While Supreme Court of India has forced Modi government to hold these elections, we still don't know what exactly is the nature of the body that people are voting for. With that kind of state of affairs, of course, things are going to be quite interesting. But one thing is for sure, it is not going to remain business as normal. I think that locals, and because of the policies of Modi government, especially earlier it was said Article 370. The reason we call the scrapping of Article 370 and 35A illegal is because even according to the system that envisioned occupation of Kashmir and normalizing it in 1948, in 1951 onwards, that system itself was broken, and that system was actually challenged or cheated through these amendments into the constitution, and that is a long debate. We can go into it. Of course, Kashmiris have faced, after the scrapping of 35A, what Kashmiris are enduring is, and Jammu's people as well, that now there is an influx of outsiders, because 35A gave the exclusive right of property inside Kashmir to the Kashmiris. Now, because the settlers are coming in, and then Adani and others are coming in, the big businesses, the local population is also afraid. In BJP, there was a fight because BJP government actually came up with a list of candidates, and then because there was a protest, they had to, and it is unimaginable, it was unimaginable before 2024, they had to retract that list, and then they had to come up with a new one. Right now, it seems that there is a fight between Congress and BJP in the Hindu population, and there is a fight, of course. NC is also there, and then PDP is also there. But there are independents who might actually be able to, and of course, BJP might think that they will be able to sway those people in support of forming a BJP government. But I don't see how that happens. And one more thing, you were talking about turnout. Whatever happened in the Indian general elections, after that, nobody is going to trust the numbers in Jammu and Kashmir, because even the national elections, their turnout is suspect, and it was challenged by Indians because the way they kept on actually updating and increasing the numbers. So all of this is a sham. But of course, as long as people are part of the system and fighting it also, they can bring about meaningful change.
Right, and that's important. And Sardar Sahab, I want your perspective on that as well. While we know, of course, whatever has been going on, particularly under the BJP-led government, whatever has been happening inside India or any sort of dissent that we see, any sort of voice that stands up to the government is shunned, and there's a lot of control and propaganda. And of course, there isn't the kind of transparency and credibility that one would expect from a truly democratic country. And so I want your take on, when we know a lot of these things about the BJP-led government, we know that these elections are a sham. How is it then that the people of Kashmir, while participating in these elections, will be able to bring about any sort of change for themselves and their future generations?
Actually, the people in Jammu and Kashmir, you know, I will not agree with the Ambassador Saab. You know, people have very limited choices in J&K. Those who believe in accession will vote for BJP and Congress. All the Kashmir parties like NC, PDP, Engineer Rashid are all independents. You know, these all voters, those who will vote, they are basic. They do not have choices like the separatists contesting elections. So people will vote for the Kashmiri parties, whether that is National Conference, PDP, or whatsoever it is. All the votes which the Indian political parties like BJP, Congress, I think that will be a standard to see that they are the people who believe in accession. Rest of the vote, whether that is for these, because the situation have changed from 1989 to 2024. About the BJP, I think there's a change in mainland India also. You have seen the elections, what happened in Gujarat with BJP. So overall, the Indians, they feel that the BJP and Modi's government, they are basically, you know, the international face. The face of India was initially that it's a secular state. Today I met with the special reporter on minorities. We were discussing about the situation, and you know, there's a lot of concern in the international community about the BJP's policies inside India. And then when you come to Kashmir, if you see the laws which are, there were Armed Forces Special Power Act, PSA before, but UAPA, and how these acts and legislation is used against the people.
Sardar Sahab, we shouldn't be even talking about who's voting for who, because it is entirely up to the 1 million Indian troops to decide who should be winning that day, because the results are in their hands.
No, actually, I'm not discussing that. I'm saying that the whosoever is voting, if he is voting for BJP or Congress, the Indian parties, because if like in 1989 when 88 elections when Muff was contesting, if there is a choice for the people to vote for separatists, then you can imagine that how people are going, what will be the trend of voters. I initially
the options are basically the same in essence. I understand what you're saying. Ambassador Saab, I want your perspective on this as well. When we talk about these elections, because you earlier were talking about defiance and protest vote, and so in light of the fact that we know what we know from within India, what is it then that gives you that hope that this can possibly be a successful act of defiance? Ambassador Saab, can you hear me?
Yeah, sure. There's so many elections that have taken place in the past in India, whether they were general elections or there was so-called state assemblies elections. Did they change anything in terms of the status of occupied Jammu and Kashmir? It stays the same. When people vote, you know, They vote because they don't want to leave the field empty, because that hasn't really worked in the past. But we know that some of these parties, even, the ones who are contesting, NC, for instance, PDP, for instance, they are calling for what? They have been calling for for the revocation of the abrogation of those, basically the revocation of the illegal acts of 5th August 2019. So that is one of the main, the platform that they have. So it is very clear what the people want there. In terms of, okay, those differences in terms of different ethnic groups, they have been there. But you have to recall that this occupied territory was 80% Muslim majority. And consistently, India has been trying to change the demographics. And that is why Article 370 was not as important, because the autonomy, the so-called limited autonomy provided, was more of a farce. But it was Article 35A, which was important, because what that meant was that as per the international laws, as per the bilateral understandings, as per the UNSC resolutions, you cannot change the status of a disputed territory in terms of demographics. The Kashmiris have to remain a majority there, because, for instance, if the Indians are free, the Indian government is free to just bring in people from all over India and change that majority into a minority, then what would be the raison d'etre of a plebiscite then? See, so that is why I think it was more about 35A, right. and that is because you see, if these political parties, they don't take part in the elections, then they had no leverage to oppose that, because they tried the other avenues available to them.
Absolutely, and I understand your point, of course. Thank you very much, Ambassador Saleem, for joining us, and that's of course valid, and especially in terms of what really is going on, and that of course it remains the issue when we talk about the Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, because that is of course something that Pakistan has been a strong advocate for in terms of the right to self-determination and the people of Kashmir to be able to choose their future, and that is not happening in these elections. We're now going to be moving on to what is going on in the Middle East, particularly in terms of the explosions that we've seen with regards to pagers. We've seen reports coming in with regards to walkie-talkies and radios also being exploded. And of course, this has resulted in a number of lives lost and thousands others injured in Lebanon, with Hezbollah, of course, talking about retaliation. And Faisal, I want your take in terms of the possibility of escalation first, and the way that these crimes are now expanding to such different aspects of warfare, while of course the genocide in Gaza continues.
Yes, and obviously there are two aspects to it. Number one, of course, we are seeing an escalation. Of course, it is from the Israeli side. They have, of course, initiated this, and as by the looks of it, the design actually is showing that it is Israel behind it, and of course the escalation would be from the Hezbollah side. But if we take a look at the events, I mean, yesterday it was the one set the pager that was involved, and the company that was involved in it. Of course, there were speculations that the explosive material was might have been fixed in all of the pagers, and that's how it got exploded.
Is that not the case?
No, not the case. I mean, now it is being apparent that it has all to do with the lithium batteries, and whatever the advancement in terms of technology Israel has grabbed on, they have actually came up with the idea how to explode them with the help of reversal frequency. I mean, that reversal frequency, how does it work? I'm not a scientist to know how does it work, but still I can predict that this kind of technology, it must have been there since few years, but they have actually tested it in Lebanon this time, because yesterday it was the pager, and the company that actually created these pagers, they simply said that it is not possible at all to, of course, fix amount of explosives in all of the pagers that can actually go into one single country and explode everyone. Of course, it has everything to do with the frequency, and the reversal frequency has actually helped ignite the lithium batteries, and that's how it happened. Why I'm saying this? Because today's examples, all the walkie-talkies which are being used by the medical services of Lebanon, which are being used by police services of the Lebanon, and people at large, few of the groups of the people, they are using it. that got exploded. And guess what? There are electronic devices like radios. I mean, car stereos and radios, they are being exploded, and cars are being
So
tossed, and
basically-
few houses.
Right. So
they
basically,
got
you're saying this
exploded.
can be expanded to many other devices,
Exactly,
and this can be increased.
it has
Right.
everything to do with the reversal of the frequency and how it is working. I mean, I'm still to sort of figure out how does it work.
Right. Let's
but it is
actually
there.
take Farrukh's perspective on that, because
Yeah, while he
it
was
seems that
talking.
he might understand. Yes. Go
No,
ahead.
no, while he was talking, I was trying to reverse the frequency here.
Right.
It is no laughing matter, but
Sure,
I
it
just
isn't.
thought that one should actually include some lighter vein as well. One thing that was shocking to me, and honestly, that wasn't the news that these devices can explode. What was that is that you know, people are using pagers in this day and age as well. Remember that Israelis are pretty advanced when it comes to software. And software hardware interface is not that difficult because both work together. And that is why, remember, Israelis came up with Pegasus, which actually shook the moorings of many societies from India to all over the world. Even France's president was spied on. So with that kind of advancement, this can be done. But my immediate reaction after I overcame my shock about pagers was, you must have seen those TikTok videos where two people are fighting and two people are watching that video, and immediately after that they look at each other with suspicion.
Yeah.
So my suspicion was, looking at my phone, that these things can also explode. The concern at this moment, of course, nobody can install any kind of explosive in pagers or any devices. The whole point is that was to track certain you know, numbers which were associated with a certain movement. But when you have actually moved to this level of fighting, I think it is going to really continue to intensify.
Yeah.
And it is going to have huge problem for the region and technology all over the world. Now everybody is, if you have an iPhone, if you have any Samsung phone, any other Android phone, you are going to be skeptical about the potential of that thing to explode in your hands or in your pocket.
Of
Yeah.
course, and
Sana,
that is, of course, a
one-liner.
scary world.
Sana,
We don't have
one-liner.
time, Faisal.
Just the one liner. You know, Farrukh said that why at this hour they are still using the pages. I mean, I asked the same question from one of my friend who happens to be, you know, quite into all of the technology, and he said it is very hard or nearly impossible to, of course, figure out the, how to hack the pages. Probably this is why.
I give you a better solution.
Yeah.
Nokia 3310, the old one, that cannot be hacked at all. So use that.
And it can't be actually stolen as well.
Well, and it can't be broken. But what the fact is, of course, that remains is that we're entering into warfare which is deadlier than what we have seen previously. And unfortunately, the genocide has been continuing, and there are people losing their lives, and there are people who are, of course, afraid that anything can happen at any point in time. And that calls for a worrisome situation for all of us, not just people in the Middle East. So we're going to be, of course, taking a look at this in further detail as the situation evolves. But of course, this is no way in anyone's favor, and it must stop. And it must start with a ceasefire in Gaza. That's all that we have from the debate. We'll now see you tomorrow.